Several years ago, a friend of mine connected me with another guy over email who was interested in possibly funding one of our documentaries. I didn't know this guy personally, I'd never met him, but the fact that my buddy would introduce me kind of gave me some hope. We scheduled a meeting and I showed up at his office ready to introduce him to our documentary project. Here's the thing. I was excited. I was just starting out and it was the first time that I was actually pitching one of my own movies. And so for me, it was a big deal. So I walked in his office and I was greeted by the first person who was his gatekeeper, at this little mini empire. The receptionist asked me to wait in the lobby, and after a few minutes, this business guy walked towards me. He was very polished, and as he approached me, he glanced down at his watch because he wanted to let me know that, his time was important. So he shook my hand, and it was one of those handshakes where it's like, it's nice to meet you, and I also want you to know I do CrossFit. We walked to his office, and he was fully engaged eyes. He looked over and he said, "So what's your movie about?" So I started telling him the backstory. How I found the idea, I was enthusiastic, and I was full of details. And after about 30 seconds, I saw his eyes start to drift towards his computer where his email was on the screen. I didn't know what to do, so I just kind of panicked and I just kept talking. He occasionally would look up at me for a few minutes off his screen, and then he would nod, just to let me know that he could hear me, but it was obvious that he wasn't listening. It was awful, and I felt so defeated. I walked out to my truck and I sat there feeling completely discouraged. I literally had those thoughts of like, what am I doing? Why am I getting into filmmaking? You have no idea what you're doing. Your ideas aren't good. It was just those voices in my head just kind of caught up with me. But on my drive home, I realized something that changed everything in my career moving forward. It wasn't that I wasn't a good filmmaker, and it wasn't that my story didn't matter. It was something simpler. I didn't know how to clearly and confidently pitch my film to get someone's attention. So let's talk about the one most important and powerful tool that a filmmaker can have in his toolkit. It's the logline. A logline is your first impression, and often it's the only chance that you'll get to hook someone into what you're, passionate about. A logline is a 1 or 2 sentence summary that tells someone what your film's about and why it matters. Something I've noticed in myself and a lot of other filmmakers that we work with is when we haven't taken the time to write, rehearse, and practice sharing our loglines before an important meeting, I show up insecure and I'm completely nervous, even after doing this for 25 years. I ramble and I explain too much and I end up just losing people. But when I know my logline by heart, I've practiced it, I'm clear, I'm confident, and I speak with conviction. And that's when people lean in and they want to hear what I have to say. A good logline creates instant clarity. So people don't buy clarity, they buy conviction, and clarity fuels conviction. It gives you the who, the what, and the why in a tight and punchy package. So how do you write one? Here's the simple formula. It starts with who, plus what they're trying to do, plus what's in the way, plus why it matters. So let me give you an example. A former coal miner in West Virginia fights to expose environmental corruption after a mysterious illness devastates his town. In this one-liner, you know who it's about, what's happening, what's at stake, why it matters, and you feel something. That's what we want. Let's walk through how to craft your logline. All right, step 1, start with the who. Who is your film really about? And be specific, not just a woman, but a teenage coal miner in rural Kentucky. All right, number 2, what are they trying to do? What's the main action, journey, or goal in the story? All right, number 3, what's standing in their way? Is it a system, a personal struggle, or a major event? All right, number 4, why does it matter? And why now? And what's so urgent about this whole thing? And why should people care? You'll see a lot of examples of this in environmental films where they say, this is critical, we do something now because the end of the world's coming, we're going to burn up, we're going to have water, we're not going to have any of these things. It's very hard to create urgency with environmental films if you can't see the impact. So a lot of times you'll see environmental films front load their films with these big statistics so that you actually care. All right, so let me give you a few quick tips to avoid common mistakes. Number 1, be specific. This is things like A documentary about hope and resilience. That sounds nice, but it doesn't tell us anything. All right, number 2, keep it short. If it takes you 15 seconds to get to basically to the point, or 3 paragraphs to understand it, it's not a log line, it's a pitch. All right, next, don't use lingo. If you're using insider terms like POV or cinema verite, either cut them out or explain them clearly. All right, here's the thing. The goal isn't to be clever. The goal is to be clear. Honestly, writing my log line is also how I get clear on my story. It helps me see what's essential and what's not. And when I'm clear on that, the rest of, my work just comes so much easier. So I try to really spend a lot of time on my log line. So once you write, test, and practice your log line, you'll start to see people lean in and say, tell me more. I've noticed that 2 things happen when people get great at log lines. They become great communicators, and that their confidence goes through the roof. That combination, it literally is like a superpower when you're pitching a film or you're telling somebody about a project that you're excited about. So if you're serious about getting your films made, or even if you're just trying to figure out your story, this is really where we start. Write it, test it, practice it, refine it. This is one of the simplest, most efficient tools I've learned to use, and it costs me nothing but a little time and attention to learn. So thanks for watching. Hit like or subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.